So you want to add authorization to your Next.js application. There are a lot of authorization providers out there, as well as open source libraries. But the one I use is Clerk, and they've just come out with a V5 beta. You'll be the first to see it right here. And they've added a critical new feature, roles and permissions. And that gives you the basis of a true multi-tenant architecture. So I'm going to show you a full application that's multi-tenant from the front all the way to the back. We're going to give you all the source code for free. And of course, this video is sponsored by my friends over at Clerk. Thank you so much to them for supporting original content here on the Blue Collar Coder. Let's get right into it. All right, so let's start off by looking at our application. You go to the home page, and the first thing you want to do is sign in. So I'm going to sign in with one of my test accounts. So what is this thing? Well, this is an application called Show Voter. All of the code is available to you for free on GitHub, and the link in the description right down below, including the starter kit and also the finished code that you're going to see. So what is it? Well, if you're like me, there are a lot of TV shows out there, and the different members of your family want to see different TV shows. So which one do you watch? Well, this is an application that helps you figure that out. So the idea here is you got a list of the shows. In this case, we've got Twin Peaks, True Detective, and The Flash. To add a new show, you just click on Add a Show and type in anything you want. There's ER, for example. This is going to the movie database to get all that information. You click on one of those, you add it, and then you can vote by clicking Vote Your Favorites. You move the shows around just by using drag and drop. Of course, all this goes available to you for free, so it's awesome. Hit Save Your Votes, and then we retally and do a ranked-based voting system, which is fantastic. So you get to see all the code for that as well. Now, there's two things you're going to need that are critical to get started with this. The first is an API key from the movie database. They're free, so that's great. And then the second is to have a Clerk account. Again, it's also free, which is great. So let's go take a look at our starter application and start building this thing out. All right, to start off, I've copied the starter directory into a new directory called Clerk5 roles and perms, and then installed it. And now I'm just going to do pm dev. And we'll go and take a look at what that looks like. And what we get is a homepage that just says hello. There's no authorization. There's no way to log in. Now let's go back and take a look at the app and look a little bit at the architecture of it. So to start off, we got a Drizzle directory. We're going to use SQLite, and Drizzle is our database. That's actually all set up. So if you go over here to source and then into the DB directory, you can see that we have a schema. That is the schema that we have. We have two tables, shows and votes. Pretty simple. The shows, importantly, have an organization ID associated with them, as well as the show ID. The organization ID is how you get the multi-tenancy in your database. So the database is effectively going to be sharded on organization ID. We're going to get that from Clerk, and you'll see that in just a little bit. So now on top of that, we have an index file that has a lot of helper functions that we're going to need along the way. For example, get shows, you give it an organization ID. Again, we get that from Clerk, and it gives us back all of the shows for that organization. Get votes gets you the votes for the particular user in this organization. Add show, as you would expect, adds a show to the database. You give it an organization, you give it a user, and then you give it information that we get from the movie database, including the show ID, the name, and a poster image. And then finally, update votes is our helper function that does the updating of all of the votes once you've gone and done the drag and drop and hit save your votes. Also, we've got some components from ShadCN. They've created button, input, and sheet, really handy. And then we've also got some custom components that are specific to this application in the app components directory. We'll get to using those in just a bit. They basically give you the entirety of the UI. What remains for us at this point is to configure Clerk, get it installed, get the user IDs going and the organizations, and I'll walk you through each step as we go along. The first thing we need to do is connect it to Clerk and get a sign-in. So we want to replace this hello with a friendly sign-in. So let's go over to Clerk. Then after we've signed in, we click on Dashboard, and we get to a homepage of the dashboard where we first need to go and create an application. So I'll create an application. I'll call it Show Voter. And I'm just going to use email addresses because I'm going to have some test users that we're going to use. And it's easy just to have an email address and then a password. So let's get create application. And the first thing we're going to need to do is go and get these credentials. So I'm going to copy that and then go over here into the app, into a .env or .env local, and then paste in the new credentials. And then I'll hit save. But if you're like, oh man, you've leaked some credentials, don't worry. The application that has these credentials is already long gone by the time you're seeing this video. But hey, if you want to put that in the comments and just increase interactions, YouTube loves that. So thank you so much for that. So let's go back and add our Clerk provider to our application. So we'll go into the layout. So from Clerk Next.js, we're going to bring in the Clerk provider as well as the user button. Let's go and wrap the app in our Clerk provider. And then we'll bring in the auth function. This is from Clerk Next.js server. So this is the server function that you can use in a React server component or RSC to get the current auth. So this is going to tell us if we have a user, what their user ID is, if they have an organization, and so on. So we'll bring that into our RSC, and now we have our user ID. I'm going to add a new div. And if we have a user ID, then I'm going to bring in user button and show that user. That's going to give us a nice circular avatar and give us a drop-down menu where we can log out. It's just a really nice, handy helper component provided by Clerk. All right, let's hit save and see where we are. All right, so now Clerk is telling us that we are calling auth in that React server component for the layout, but we don't have any Clerk middleware installed, so we need to install our Clerk middleware. So let's go back over in our app. And then under source, we're going to create a new file called middleware.ts. And we're going to add our Clerk middleware. In version 5, the middleware got a makeover, and it's even easier to use than the version 4 version. So we just bring in the Clerk middleware, then we export the default. When we invoke Clerk middleware, we get an auth and a request that we're not using quite yet. And in this case, we're just going to go and send off to response.next. So we do want one thing to be protected, not the homepage route. That's where everything happens, but there is a shows search route. That's what the sheet that goes and handles the search calls. Now, I don't want anybody calling that who isn't authorized. I don't want them using that as a way to get all that information out of the movie database without using our app. So I'm going to go and protect that route. So to do that, I bring in create route matcher. So the route I want to protect is /shows/search. So I'm creating a regular expression that I pass to create route matcher that has /shows in it. So anything under /shows is going to be a protected route. And it gives me back a function called, well, in this case, is protected route. And I can use that to then go and protect that route. So down in my middleware, I'm going to take the request that I got back from the Clerk middleware. I'm going to pass that on to is protected route. And if it shows as true, then I'm going to say that that is a protected route. Doesn't mean you can't access it, but it does mean that you have to be logged in order to access it. All right, let's hit save and see how we go. All right, seems to be happy. Now, the next thing we need to do is go and put a sign in on there. So let's go back to our page. Now, page is just a React server component that says hello. So because it's a React server component, I'm going to bring in auth again. And then I'm going to use .protect on auth to go and protect this route. And protect in this case just means go and force me to go to the sign-in page. Now hit save. So now that we can see that in the URL that we've been forwarded to /signin and we get a 404 because that route doesn't exist. But why did it go to /signin? Well, let's go take a look over in our VS Code in the .env file. And there are some environment variables that you can set with Clerk that tell it the routes that you want to use for sign in and sign up and so on. At this point, we've said /signin for our sign in page. So that's why it went to /signin. So let's go and create the /signin route. So under app, I'm going to create a new file. And this is a bit of a trick, VS Code trick. This is a good one. So here we go. Sign in. And then within that, double brackets, ... sign in. Now that's from Next.js. That's saying that anything after /signin, it should go and add that as a parameter. It's optional though, thus the double brackets. So inside of that, we'll do page.tsx. And now having put in the slashes, it automatically creates the directory for sign in and then the double bracket sign in. And now the page.tsx file at the end. Just a really nice way to go and create directories really easily in VS Code. Okay, so let's go and bring in our implementation. And the implementation is as easy as bringing in the sign in component and just putting it inside of a nice frame. Let's refresh. And now we've got our login. Awesome. Okay, so now we need to go and create some users because we don't have any users and it's taking an email address. So let's go back over to our Clerk dashboard and we'll create some users. Now there's 3 different roles in our app. There is a manager, that is the person who can add shows and also vote. There's a voter, that's a person who can only vote. And then there's a viewer, that's a person who can't do either of those things. They can just see what's next up in our list of shows. So let's go create users for each one of those. So we'll create a user. We'll create manager first, then voter, and finally viewer. And now let's log in. So I can go over here to manager@test.com, give my bad password. And now I'm logged in as manager and I can click on my user button that we added to our header and we can see that we have manager@test.com and we get an ability to sign out our manager account or do things like that. All right, now that we've got a login, the next thing we want to do is go and show the list of shows. They looked really cool. Let's go and replace that hello with the list of shows. So let's go back over to our Visual Studio Code. Get rid of sign in, go to the main page. So we got our hello in there. So what's the component that's going to show the list of shows? Well, over here in components, we have a main page component. It is a client component. It basically does all of the work of showing the voting or bringing up the sheet of adding a show, or in this case, the show list. So it brings in show list and then it uses the show list component to show the shows. So let's go bring in main page and put it into our page. We'll replace our hello with the main page. Hit save. And now we get an error that use shows context must be within a shows provider. So why is that? Well, we've got this show context and it's got a custom hook called use shows, and that use shows manages a list of all of the shows that we have in our org, as well as all the votes that I have as a user. And it's just a nice way of getting all the data around. So we need to go and bring in the shows provider, which is defined here at the bottom, and then put it into the layout and get this information over to our show list. So let's go back over to layout. And then we'll bring in our show provider. And then we'll wrap our UI in it. So I'll go down here, right around the React Query provider and add in the shows provider. All right, now this is telling us that they're missing a few things. If we go back over into our show provider, let's see what we're missing. So our show provider wants shows and votes. So let's get both of those. To do that, we are going to bring in the handily named get shows and get votes from the database. Now down here, we're going to go and bring in our get shows and get votes and hopefully get the shows and votes. But we also need an organization ID, so let's bring that in as well. And then we'll just pass those shows and votes onto our show provider. Hit save. And we get nothing. Now, that's not great. So what's happening here? Well, what's happening here is we don't actually have an organization. So let's talk about why we need an organization in the first place. So we've got our app, right? Show voter. And then within that, we have a list of all the users. And then within users, we have our different users. We got manager, voter, viewer, like we've just done. So how do we know what those folks can do? Other than their names, we need to have them assigned roles. And in order to assign them roles, we have to have some organizations. So in this case, we're going to create a new organization called the Smith family. So each one of those users is now going to be assigned a role within that Smith family org. The admin role will have the permissions to add a show and add votes. The voter role will only have the permission to add votes, and the viewer role will have no permissions at all. And we'll key our UI off of those permissions. So let's go and create this over in Clerk. So over in Clerk, we're going to go to organizations. Now we need to enable organizations for this to work. And then we get these tabs, roles and permissions. So let's create our permissions first. Say add a show as our first permission. And then we'll use this template. And the template is feature and permission. So in this case, the feature is show and the permission is create. And then we have one more permission to add, and then that's the ability to vote. So add a vote. The feature is vote, and the permission is create. Say create permission, and now we've got our two permissions. So now let's go and add some roles. We have, by default, an admin role as well as a member role. Let's create some new roles. One is for voter. And then the moment that I create the role, I get this permissions dialog that allows me to set the permissions for that role. So for the voter role, we only want them to be able to add a vote. So we'll save some changes there. Now we'll go back to roles and we'll create one for viewer. And we'll create role. And they're not going to have any permissions at all. They can only view the shows that are available. So now let's talk about that admin role, because our manager is going to be an admin. So the admin role is actually a little bit different. The admin role is the admin for this particular organization. So that's going to have some Clerk specific features already baked into it. The ability to change memberships. Your membership is your presence within that organization. So every app has a bunch of different users. And when they're attached to an organization, they're then a member of that organization. Now let's go and add our permissions to the admin role. But what if we wanted to have a role that had the manager permissions but didn't have the ability to maintain memberships? Well, we can create a new role called, for example, manager. And then we can create that role and add those permissions to it. Now that role is kind of like an admin minus, which is just fine. All right, so now let's go and take a look over at organizations again. And we have no organization. So let's create that Smith family organization. And the owner is going to be the manager. So now when we go in there, we can see that our members within that organization, manager is the admin of that organization. So now let's go and add the other two. And then also viewer as a viewer. All right, so now we've got our users added. They are within this particular organization, Smith family. Let's go and see if we can get information about that organization so we can then pass it on to the database. So over in the main page, we've got organization ID. So let's go put up a little warning that says, if we don't have an organization currently, then say no organization. So let's hit save. And we're currently saying no organization. Let's log out and log back in again and see if we can get that organization. Okay, so we currently still don't have an organization, even though we've logged in. So why is that? So let's go back to our diagram. Now this is currently where we are. We've created our users, we've given them the roles within the Smith family organization. Let's just say hypothetically that we added a new organization, the Jones family, and they might want some members as well. Now, voter at test.com could also be a viewer on the Jones family. So you can have the same user in multiple organizations simultaneously. And then there's a concept of an active organization, which is the organization that I'm logged into right now. Now in our test data set, all of the users are only associated with a single organization. So what we really want to do is just say, when you log in, then just push them into that organization. Make it the active organization for them. So let's go back into our code and make that happen. So over in the Clerk documentation, there's a really handy component called sync active organization. And what this component does is it takes a list of the memberships that you have, and then it takes the first membership along the line, and it sets that as the active organization. So let's go bring that into our app over in our layout. But in order to make this work, we actually need the list of all the memberships. So how are we going to get those? Well, let's go back to Clerk. And what we can do in Clerk is go to Sessions and then customize our jot so that we can say, when you log in, go and add some additional information onto your jot, including the organizations that you're a member of. To do that, we simply add a membership key. You can call it anything you want, and then you put in the special value of user.organizations. So let's go take a look once we do that. So I'm going to log out and then log back in. Still no organization, but let's go see if we've actually got that data. So I'm going to bring in another piece of data, session claims, and then just console log that out. Now this is running on the server and it's probably auto refreshed, and look at that. Okay, so we have our session claims. This is all the information on the jot, and part of that is the membership key that we just added with a object that has the key of your organization and then the value of your role inside that organization. In this case, I'm currently logged in as manager, so that's why I'm seeing the admin role. All right, looks good. So let's go and send that on to sync active organizations. To do that, we just add on the membership key. Now we're getting a type unknown, and that's because we've gone and arbitrarily added this new thing to this jot. TypeScript doesn't know about it. So let's go and add some typing that allows us to say that there's some custom stuff on the jot that's specific to this application. And then we declare globally that we have some new custom jot session claims, including our membership that we just added as a record of a key to a value. All right, let's hit save and let's see how we go. All right, the no organization is gone. Awesome. So we've got everything cooking. We are now in the Smith family. That's great. Next thing we need to do is actually get this thing working. So let's hit add a show and nothing happens. So what do we need to do? Well, we need to go back into our page and start adding that capability. So over on our page, we're going to go bring in our database stuff. That includes add show, get votes, update votes. That's all the stuff we're going to need to go and implement this UI. Next thing we're going to do is add a server action that's going to allow us to add a show. So let's bring that in. We're going to call it add show action. It's going to be a server action because it's an async function that uses use server. So that's going to only run on the server. Now, the first thing we're going to do in our server action is figure out who you are, who's calling that server action. To do that, we call auth and we get back the user ID and the org ID. And then we also want to know, do you have the permission to add a show? We want to check that right here. That's really important. So we're going to bring in has, and then we're going to use has to say, well, you have to be logged in first, but you also have to have the permission that we want. In this case, the permission is org show create. That's the permission that we created early on. And when you have that permission, then you can do the add show. You can't do it without it. Now, it's really important to do it here because you want to check both on the client and on the server. So you've got API routes, you want to make sure that they're checked. If you got server actions, you want to make sure they're checked like we do here, so that even if the user decides to go and hack through the system and call that action manually, they still can't get through because they still don't have that permission. So now let's go take that add show action and add it to our main page. Now main page doesn't know what add show is, so let's go add it. So we'll go and add that as a property. Now we don't know what show and vote are, so let's go bring those in from the database. That's Drizzle going and creating the TypeScript types for our schema. Really nice. So the next thing we want to do is bring in the UI for our search sheet. That's the thing that we bring up if you can add a show. So we'll bring in search sheet, and then right at the top here, we'll invoke search sheet and give it that add show server action that we just created. So let's hit save and see what it looks like. All right, so we can add a show. ER, and there you go. Now we've added a show. But what happens if we go in as voter? We don't want to see that add a show. So let's sign out and then do voter@test.com. All right, now we shouldn't be seeing add a show because we don't have the permission to do that, but we do see it. So let's click on it and try. Let's say I want to see Game of Thrones. I'll click on that. And now nothing happens because that server action is saying, well, you don't have the permission, so I'm just going to return the list of the shows and votes that are already there. So sorry, but that's not a great user interaction. What we really want to do is just make sure that they can't do it in the first place. So let's go and remove add a show if they don't have that permission. To do that, we bring in another component from Clerk. This one is called protect. And then we can wrap any component we want in that protect, and it will only show that component if we have those permissions. Now let's go down to our button and just put it in a protect with the permission of org show create. Now we no longer see that button because we don't have that permission. Cool. And we can do even a little better by just making sure that we don't even have the search sheet if we don't have that permission. All right, so now there's one more thing that you can do in our application, and that's vote. And we want to be able to do that. So let's go back into our VS Code, go over to page, and we're going to add another custom server action. This one is going to eventually invoke update votes. So we call it the update votes action, and then we tell it what votes we want to change. That's by dragging and dropping and all that. And then it goes off and again, it checks to make sure that you have the permission that we wanted. In this case, org vote create as opposed to org show create. And then if you've got that permission, then we'll go and run the DB call to update your votes. Let's hit save. All right, let's go add this to our main page. We'll go and update our props. Then we'll bring in sortable shows. That's the thing that allows us to vote. And then down in our UI, there's a voting toggle that just toggles voting your favorites. It just sets it on and off. It's a Boolean called voting. So when that Boolean is on, then we will do the sortable shows UI. And when it's off, then we'll just do the regular UI. And then we'll wrap that in protect to make sure that we only show that UI if we have that permission. And of course, we want to do the same logic around the button. So let's go and take that protect and drop it in there around the vote your favorites button. All right, let's go check it out. Nice. Let's go and add that. Perfect. Save your votes. Awesome. Now let's go and see if viewer can see it. All right, we can see we want to watch ER, but they can't vote or add a show. And then let's go make sure that manager can do both of those things. And they can. Awesome. And with that, the example is finished, but let's do a quick recap of all the things we've learned in this video. First up, we added our environment where we set our Clerk environment variables. Then we went and added our Clerk provider to our layout. In order to make that Clerk provider work, we needed to add some middleware, which is super easy with a V5 API. That got us to our sign-in page. We simply created a route for a sign-in and then added our sign-in UI, wrapped in a little bit of Tailwind. Then we needed to get the information that was specific to this particular user. So back in layout, we used that auth function to get the user's information and then to get their shows and their votes. But we couldn't do that because we didn't have our organization structure set up. So we went back to Clerk, we enabled organizations, we set those up, and then we brought in that sync active organization to put you into the right organization on startup. Of course, in order to do that, we need to set up some custom JOT claims. And then we brought those in using that auth function, and we sent those on to sync active organization. To make sure that we were good with TypeScript, we brought in our session claims on the globals. Then over in the page, we added our server actions. We made absolutely sure that the server actions had an authorization check to make sure that you had an organization, that you had a user, and that you had the right permissions to actually do what the server action was going to do, add a show or add votes. Then we sent those server actions onto our main page. Then over main page on the UI side, we use the protect component from Clerk to make sure that we didn't even show the UI if you couldn't actually use it. So now this application could handle any number of orgs. And in this case, orgs means tenants. So we have a complete end-to-end multi-tenant application for you. This is really good stuff. Of course, all of the code is available to you for free in the GitHub link right down below, provided to you by our friends over at Clerk. Thank you so much for sponsoring the original content right here on the Blue Collar Coder. If you have any questions or comments, be sure to put those in the comment section right down below. If you like the video, hit that like button. If you really like the video, click on the subscribe button and ring that bell and be notified the next time a new Blue Collar Coder comes out.